6-year-old Lily Caldwell hadn't spoken since the accident that killed her mother 2 years ago. Her CEO, Father Ethan, brought her to California's most exclusive resort, desperate for anything that might break her silence after countless failed therapists. But it wasn't the luxury or the specialists who reached her. It was Ava, a hotel maid who left a red paper crane on a garden bench and hummed lullabies while watering flowers. When Lily picked up that crane and actually looked at someone for the first time in 2 years, Ethan realized this minimum-wage worker understood something about his daughter's trauma that all his money and power couldn't touch. He had no idea that Ava had once pulled children from burning buildings, or that she knew exactly how to wait for voices to return from the dark places trauma sends them. All he knew was that his silent daughter was leaning toward this stranger's, humming like it was the first safe sound she'd heard since her world shattered. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The California coastline stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Meridian Resort, where morning light painted everything in shades of gold and pearl. Ethan Caldwell stood at the reception desk, his tailored charcoal suit immaculate despite the 3-hour drive from San Francisco. His fingers drummed against the marble counter while the clerk processed his reservation, each tap betraying an impatience he'd never voice aloud. "Daddy, look at the fish." The words existed only in his memory. Lily hadn't spoken them, hadn't spoken anything for 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days. But Ethan heard them anyway, an echo from before, when his 6-year-old daughter would have been tugging at his sleeve, pointing excitedly at the massive aquarium that dominated the lobby's eastern wall. Instead, Lily stood perfectly still beside their luggage, her small hands folded in front of her powder blue dress. She watched the tropical fish with an expression that revealed nothing, her silence as complete as the vacuum of space. The other guests probably thought she was remarkably well-behaved. They didn't know she'd forgotten how to be anything else. "Your suite is ready, Mr. Caldwell," the clerk announced with practiced warmth. "The Ocean View penthouse, as requested. Will you be needing assistance with your bags?" "We'll manage." Ethan's voice carried the kind of authority that ended conversations. He'd built a $40 million company with that voice, commanded boardrooms with it, closed deals that lesser men would have fumbled. But it couldn't make his daughter say good morning. The glass-walled dining room buzzed with the comfortable chatter of wealthy vacationers when they entered for breakfast 20 minutes later. Ethan had chosen a corner table deliberately, positioning them away from the worst of the noise, while still maintaining a view of the hotel's famous gardens. The space opened onto terraces that cascaded down toward the ocean, each level bursting with subtropical plants he couldn't name and didn't care to learn. "The waffles here are supposed to be excellent," he told Lily, unfolding her napkin with the same precision he applied to quarterly reports. "With fresh strawberries. You used to love strawberries." She looked through him rather than at him, her gaze fixed on something beyond the windows. A butterfly, maybe, or the way the fountain caught the light. Dr. Harrison had said to keep talking to her, that maintaining normal conversation patterns was crucial even without response. 27 months of one-sided discussions had worn Ethan's patience down to its frame. "Or pancakes," he continued, his tone professionally pleasant. "They have chocolate chip pancakes. Real chocolate, not that synthetic stuff." Nothing. Not even a shift in her breathing. A woman moved through his peripheral vision, her movements deliberate but unobtrusive. The hotel uniform marked her as staff, the cleaning supplies on her cart confirming her position. She was young, maybe late 20s, with skin the color of burnished mahogany and eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. Her name tag read Ava Thompson in simple letters. She worked with an economy of motion that Ethan recognized from his best employees, the ones who understood efficiency without sacrificing thoroughness. Her hands moved steadily as she wiped down the nearby tables, but Ethan caught her glancing toward their corner more than once. Not at him, at Lily. "Is there something you need?" The question came out sharper than intended, his CEO voice cutting through the breakfast ambience. Ava straightened slowly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "No, sir. Just ensuring your area is comfortable." "It's fine." But she didn't immediately move away. Instead, she bent to retrieve something from the floor, a paper napkin that had fallen from their table. As she rose, she passed close enough. To Lily, that Ethan tensed, ready to intervene. The girl didn't like strangers in her space, hadn't since the accident, yet Lily didn't pull away. She watched Ava with the same distant attention she gave to the fish in the lobby, as if the woman was simply another part of the scenery, interesting but unthreatening. The gardens are particularly beautiful this morning, Ava said softly, addressing the comment to the space between them rather than to anyone specific. The morning glories just opened. Then she was gone, pushing her cart toward the kitchen with that same measured pace. Ethan found himself oddly unsettled by the interaction, though he couldn't articulate why. Perhaps it was the way she'd looked at Lily, not with pity or curiosity, but with something that resembled understanding. His phone vibrated against the table. Marcus, his CFO, with updates about the Steinberg merger. Ethan answered on the second ring, his voice dropping into its business register. "Talk to me. We have a problem," Marcus said without preamble. "Steinberg's getting cold feet about the valuation. He wants another 15% equity, or he walks. He's bluffing. Maybe. But his lawyers are already drafting withdrawal paperwork." Ethan's jaw tightened. The merger would triple their market share, position them for an IPO within 18 months. He'd spent 6 months courting Steinberg, carefully maneuvering pieces into place. "Set up a call for this afternoon. Full team. You're supposed to be on vacation. I'm supposed to be running a company." He ended the call with more force than necessary, the sound sharp enough to draw looks from nearby tables. Lily hadn't moved, hadn't even blinked at the sudden noise. 2 years ago, she would have scolded him for being rude, her little voice serious as she reminded him about inside voices and using nice words. The memory sat like glass in his chest. They left the dining room 40 minutes later, their plates largely untouched. Ethan had managed to coax 3 bites of waffle into Lily through patient persistence, though she'd chewed mechanically, tasting nothing. The doctor said not to force it, that her appetite would return when she felt safe enough. Ethan wondered how much safer she could feel than in a 5-star resort where rooms cost more per night than most people made in a week. The hallway leading to their suite curved past a wall of windows overlooking the gardens. Lily slowed as they passed, her steps dragging until she stopped entirely. Below them, the gardens spread out in carefully orchestrated chaos, winding stone paths between beds of birds of paradise, jasmine climbing wooden trellises, a series of connected ponds where koi swam in lazy circles. "Would you like to go down there?" Ethan asked, checking his watch. The conference call was in 3 hours. They could spare 20 minutes. Lily didn't answer, of course, but something in her posture shifted. A leaning toward the glass, perhaps, or a softness in her shoulders. Ethan took it as agreement. The garden was even more elaborate up close. The landscaping created natural rooms within the space, each with its own character. A Mediterranean section featured olive trees and lavender. A Japanese-inspired corner held carefully pruned bonsai, and a small sand garden. The paths between them were wide enough for wheelchairs but intimate enough to feel private. Lily gravitated toward the koi ponds, where wooden bridges arced over the water at picturesque intervals. She stood at the railing of one, looking down at the fish with that same impenetrable expression. Orange and white bodies moved beneath the surface, occasionally breaking through to gulp air before diving again. "The large one is probably 20 years old," Ethan said, filling the silence with facts because facts were easier than feelings. "Koi can live for decades if they're properly cared for. Some even reach 100. A shadow fell across the water. Ava stood on the path behind them, a watering can in one hand and pruning shears in the other. She'd changed from her dining room uniform into gardening clothes, though they were equally neat. "I'm sorry," she said, though she didn't sound particularly apologetic. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm covering for James while he's at a doctor's appointment. It's a public space." Ethan replied curtly. She nodded and moved past them toward a bed of roses that clearly needed attention. But as she worked, she hummed, a low, wordless melody that seemed to rise from her chest rather than her throat. It wasn't performative, wasn't meant for them. She hummed the way some people breathed, naturally and without thought. Lily's head turned slightly, tracking the sound. "She doesn't talk," Ethan said abruptly, the words escaping before he could stop them. "My daughter. She doesn't talk, so don't expect her to answer if you speak to her." Ava paused in her pruning, considering this information with the same careful attention she gave to selecting which stems to cut. Most people say too much anyway, she replied finally. Sometimes silence is its own language. She's not choosing to be silent. She can't speak. There's a difference. I didn't say she was choosing it. Ava's voice remained steady, uninflected. I said silence has meaning, whether we choose it or it chooses us. The response irritated him in ways he couldn't quite name. This woman, this maid, presuming to philosophy about his daughter's condition. He'd consulted the best specialists in California, had read every study on selective mutism and trauma-induced speech loss. What could a hotel employee possibly understand about the complexity of Lily's situation? We should go, he said to Lily, though he was really speaking to Ava. You need to rest before lunch. But Lily had wandered a few steps away, drawn to a carved stone bench beneath a jacaranda tree. Her small fingers traced the patterns in the stone, interlocking circles that had been worn smooth by countless other hands. She looked peaceful there, more relaxed than he'd seen her in months. 5 more minutes, he conceded, pulling out his phone to review Marcus's latest emails. Ava continued her work in silence now. The humming stopped. But every so often, Ethan caught her watching Lily from the corner of her eye. Not staring, not intrusive, just aware. The way a gardener might watch a seedling, checking for signs of growth or distress. When they finally returned to the suite, Lily went straight to her room without prompting. Ethan heard the soft click of her door closing, the careful way she turned the handle so it wouldn't make noise. Everything she did was careful now, as if she was afraid of disturbing the universe. His phone rang. Marcus again. Steinberg's team wants to move the call up. Can you do it in an hour? Fine. Ethan moved to the suite's office area, spreading papers across the mahogany desk. Send me the updated projections. Already in your inbox. Ethan, Marcus hesitated. How's Lily? The same. The therapist said this trip might help, right? Change of scenery, less pressure. The therapist says a lot of things. Ethan opened his laptop, watching spreadsheets populate the screen. The call's in an hour? Yeah. Good luck. Luck. As if luck had anything to do with it. Ethan had built his success on preparation, analysis, and the ability to see 3 moves ahead of his competition. Luck was for people who didn't do their homework. But as he reviewed the merger documents, his mind kept drifting to the garden, to the way Lily had traced those circles in the stone, to Ava's comment about silence being its own language. He shook off the distraction. The merger was what mattered now. Everything else could wait. That evening, after a conference call that had stretched to 2 hours and accomplished nothing except to confirm Steinberg's intransigence, Ethan found himself standing on the suite's balcony. The garden spread below him, lit by discreet spotlights that turned the plants into a living painting. He could see the bench where Lily had sat, the pond where the koi swam, the paths that wound between them like neural pathways in a vast green brain. A figure moved through the garden. Ava, he realized, making some kind of evening rounds. She stopped at the bench, placing something small on its surface before continuing on her way. The action was deliberate but unexplained, like everything else about her. The next morning arrived wrapped in coastal fog, the kind that turned the world soft at its edges. Ethan woke to find Lily already dressed, standing by the suite's windows with her sketchbook clutched against her chest. She'd been drawing more lately. Dr. Harrison said it was a good sign, a way of processing when words wouldn't come. Would you like to go to the garden before breakfast? He asked, recognizing the direction of her gaze. She moved toward the door in answer, her pale yellow sundress catching the filtered light. Ethan grabbed his phone and coffee, resigning himself to another morning of one-sided conversation and silent observation. The garden was different in the early hours, quieter and more private. Dew still clung to the spider webs strung between rose bushes, and the only sounds were birdsong and the gentle splash of the fountain. Lily went straight to the koi pond, settling on the wooden platform that extended slightly over the water. She opened her sketchbook and began drawing with the focused intensity that had replaced her chatter. Ethan positioned himself on a nearby bench, close enough to watch but far enough to give her space. He opened his emails, finding 17 new messages since midnight. The Singapore office had concerns about the quarterly projections. The legal team needed approval on the new contract language. Marcus wanted to schedule another call about Steinberg. They like the color red. The voice was soft, directed at Lily rather than him. Ava stood a few feet away with a watering can, tending to the lilies that bordered the pond. She wasn't looking at either of them, just speaking to the air. The koi, she continued, her tone conversational but unpressing. They can see colors we can't even imagine, but red is special to them. It means food, usually. Safety. Good things. Coming. Lily's hand stilled on her sketchbook. She looked at the fish, then at Ava, then back at the fish. Several of them had gathered near the surface where a red maple leaf floated. Don't waste your time, Ethan said sharply. I told you, she doesn't. I'm not wasting anything, Ava replied mildly. I'm watering plants and sharing information. If she wants to listen, she will. If not, the flowers still get what they need. The response should have annoyed him more than it did. But something about her tone, matter of fact rather than defensive, deflated his irritation. She moved on to the next bed, leaving them with their respective silences. Lily returned to her drawing, but Ethan noticed she'd added splashes of red to whatever she was creating. Mr. Caldwell. He turned to find the hotel's general manager approaching, her expression professionally concerned. I apologize for interrupting your morning, but I wanted to inform you that Mr. Hayes has arrived. Victor Hayes. The name hit Ethan's stomach like cold water. He's not supposed to be here until next week. He moved his reservation up. He's actually requesting a meeting with you this afternoon, if your schedule permits. Ethan's schedule never permitted meetings with Victor Hayes, not since the man had tried to orchestrate a hostile takeover of Caldwell Industries 2 years ago. The attempt had failed, but the animosity lingered like smoke after a fire. Tell him I'm unavailable. Of course. The manager hesitated. I should also mention he's expressing interest in hosting a charity event here this weekend. Something about children's wellness initiatives. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Victor knew about Lily, of course. Everyone in their business circle knew about the accident, about Ethan's daughter who no longer spoke. Using it as leverage was exactly the kind of move Victor would make. Thank you for letting me know, Ethan said, his voice carefully neutral, after. The manager left. He found his hands clenched into fists. The peaceful morning had curdled into something else, the fog suddenly feeling oppressive rather than soft. He needed to call Marcus, needed to figure out what Victor was planning. Daddy's upset. The words were so clear in his memory that he almost turned, almost expected to see Lily looking at him with those serious eyes she used to have, ready to offer one of her 6-year-old solutions to adult problems. A hug, usually. Sometimes a drawing of a rainbow, but she was still focused on her sketchbook, adding careful strokes to her creation. She'd drawn the pond, he realized, complete with fish and that floating maple leaf. But there were other elements too, hands reaching toward each other across the water, a red scarf flowing between them like a bridge. The image made his chest tight. The red scarf. Always the red scarf. We should go get breakfast, he said, his voice rougher than intended. I in the hotel staff break room 3 floors down. Ava poured herself tea while her colleague Maria gossiped about the morning's arrivals. That Hayes man is here, Maria said, wrinkling her nose. You know, the one who owns all those buildings downtown. He asked for a room change 3 times before he was satisfied, acting like he owns the place. Ava responded non-committally. You used to work in one of his buildings, didn't you? Before you came here. Briefly. What made you leave teaching? Maria pressed. I mean, you were so good with kids. Remember when that family visited last year with the boy who kept having meltdowns? You were the only one who could calm him down. Ava sipped her tea, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes life takes you in unexpected directions. But from teaching to hotel work? That's quite a change. It's all service, in the end. Just different kinds. Maria wanted to push further, Ava could tell, but the break room door opened and their supervisor entered with the day's assignments. Ava was grateful for the interruption. Some stories weren't meant for casual conversation. Back in the garden, she found evidence of the morning's visit. A forgotten hair tie near the pond, probably Lily's. Ava picked it up, studying the simple elastic band with its small fabric flower. Such a normal thing, the kind of accessory any 6-year-old might wear. But nothing about that child was normal anymore, was it? She'd seen the signs immediately. The way Lily held herself so carefully, as if afraid of taking up space. The hypervigilance, disguised as good behavior. The drawings that revealed more than any words could. Selective mutism, the textbooks called it, though Ava had always thought that was a cold term for such a profound response to trauma. During her teaching years, she'd worked with 3 children who'd stopped speaking. 2 had recovered their voices within months. The third, well, the third had taught her that sometimes healing couldn't be rushed or forced. Sometimes it had to be invited and then waited for, like a skittish cat that might eventually trust you enough to come close. She placed the hair tie on the carved bench, next to the origami crane she'd left the night before. Small offerings, breadcrumbs on a path that might lead nowhere. But you had to try, didn't you? You had to believe that voices could return, that silence wasn't permanent, that gardens could be more than just pretty spaces for tourists to photograph. Ava, she, turned to find Mr. Winters, the elderly groundskeeper, wheeling a cart full of mulch. "James is still out sick," he said. "Mind helping me with the rose garden?" Of course. They worked in companionable silence for a while, spreading fresh mulch around the base of each bush. Mr. Winters had been at the hotel for 30 years, had seen it through 3 renovations and countless seasons. He knew every plant by name, every stone path's history. "That little girl," he said eventually, nodding toward the pond. "The quiet one. She reminds me of my granddaughter after her mother died. Took her 2 years to speak again." "Did she speak again?" "Oh yes. One day just opened her mouth and asked for pancakes, casual as you please. Like those 2 years of silence had never happened." He paused, considering. Except they had happened, of course. The silence was part of her story, just not the end of it. Ava thought about that as they finished the roses. Stories without endings. Middles that stretched too long. Beginnings that no one could quite pinpoint. Maybe that's what she was seeing in Lily. A middle that felt endless but wasn't. A story still being written. That afternoon, Ethan stood in the hotel's business center, his laptop open to a video conference with his board of directors. They were discussing the Steinberg merger, voices tinny through the speakers as they debated. Valuations and risk assessments. "We can't appear desperate," one board member argued. "If we give Steinberg what he wants now, what's to stop him from demanding more later? We need this merger," another countered. "The market window won't stay open forever." Ethan half listened, his attention split between the screen and the window overlooking the garden. Lily was down there again, had been for an hour now. He'd assigned one of the hotel's childcare staff to watch her, a cheerful woman named Susan, who specialized in keeping young guests entertained. But Lily wasn't interested in entertainment. She sat on the carved bench with her sketchbook, drawing and occasionally looking up when birds landed nearby. Ava passed through his line of sight, carrying a tray of what looked like seedlings. She paused near Lily, set down her tray, and began working on a nearby flower bed. Not hovering, not intruding, just present. Susan, the childcare specialist, was checking her phone 10 feet away. "Ethan, your thoughts?" He snapped back to the conference. "We hold our position. Steinberg needs this merger as much as we do. He's testing us. And if he walks, he won't." But even as he said it, Ethan wasn't sure he cared as much as he should. The merger had consumed 18 months of his life, countless hours of negotiation and strategy. It should feel more important than watching his daughter draw pictures of birds. After the call ended, he found himself walking toward the garden without conscious decision. Susan brightened when she saw him. "Oh good, you're here. I need to use the restroom." She's been perfectly behaved, hasn't moved from that spot. She hurried off before Ethan could respond, leaving him standing awkwardly on the path. Lily didn't acknowledge his presence, absorbed in adding detail to what looked like a red bird with elaborate tail feathers. "That's quite good," he said, the words feeling inadequate. Ava looked up from her planting. She's been watching the cardinal that nests in the jacaranda tree. It comes by every afternoon around this time. "You've been observing?" "I pay attention." She stood, brushing soil from her hands. "Your daughter sees things very clearly. Most children her age would just draw a red blob and call it a bird. But, look." She moved closer, pointing to Lily's drawing without touching it. "She's captured the way the wing feathers layer, the angle of the head when it's listening for insects. That's unusual perception. She's always been observant," Ethan said, then caught himself. Was that true? He remembered Lily as chatty and energetic, not particularly focused. But maybe he hadn't been paying the right kind of attention. There's a story, Ava said, returning to her seedlings, about a bird that forgot how to sing. All the other birds tried to teach it. The robin showed it melody. The crow demonstrated volume. But nothing worked. Then one day, the bird sat in a garden, just listening. And in the quiet, it remembered its own voice had been there all along, waiting. That's a nice story, Ethan said stiffly. But this isn't a fairy tale. No, Ava agreed. It's not. She picked up her tray and moved to another section of the garden, leaving them alone. But she'd placed one of the seedlings in a small pot. Near the bench, its leaves still damp from watering. That evening, Victor Hayes made his presence known. Ethan was crossing the lobby when Victor's voice cut through the ambient noise. Caldwell. What a surprise. He turned to find Victor holding court near the bar, surrounded by several people Ethan recognized from the industry. Victor's smile was all teeth, no warmth. Hayes, I heard you were here. Much needed vacation, I assume? The Steinberg situation must be stressful. Several heads turned at the mention of Steinberg. Of course Victor would know about the merger troubles. He probably had informants in half the companies in Silicon Valley. I'm sure you have your own deals to worry about. Ethan replied evenly. Oh, I keep busy. In fact, I'm organizing a little charity event here this weekend. Children's wellness initiatives. You should come. Bring your daughter. The words were calculated to cut. Victor knew about Lily's condition, was weaponizing it already. We'll see, Ethan said, moving toward the elevator. It's important to give back, Victor called after him, especially those of us with personal stakes in children's health. Ethan didn't respond, but his jaw was clenched so tight it ached by the time the elevator doors closed. Back in the suite, he found Lily asleep on the couch, her sketchbook open beside her. She'd drawn more pictures of the red bird, each from a different angle. But on the last page was something different. The origami crane Ava had left on the bench, rendered in careful detail. Ethan picked up the actual crane from where Lily had left it on the coffee table. It was made from bright red paper, creased with precision. Such a simple thing. But Lily had carried it up from the garden like treasure. His phone buzzed. Marcus, with updates about Steinberg and questions about strategy. Ethan set the phone aside without reading the message. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow he'd deal with Steinberg and Victor and all the rest of it. Tonight, he sat beside his sleeping daughter and studied her drawings, trying to see what she saw, trying to understand the story she was telling without words that I in the garden. Below, Ava finished her evening rounds. She paused at the carved bench, noting the empty pot where she'd left the seedling. Good. The girl had taken it, just as she'd taken the crane. Small acceptances, tiny surrenders of isolation. Progress was measured in such small increments with children like Lily. A whispered word here, a moment of eye contact there. You couldn't rush it, couldn't force it. You could only create the conditions. For growth and then wait, patient as a gardener, for something to bloom. Tomorrow, she'd leave something else. Maybe a smooth stone from the beach, or a feather from the cardinal Lily had been drawing. Little bridges between silence and sound, between isolation and connection, because every voice, even the lost ones, wanted to be found. You just had to know how to listen for them. The morning routine had become something unexpected, predictable. For 3 days now, Lily had risen with the sun, dressed herself in whatever soft cotton dress hung nearest in the closet, and stood by the window. Until Ethan acknowledged what she wanted. The garden. Always the garden. This morning, she wore mint green, her dark hair pulled back with the elastic band Ava had returned yesterday, the one with the small fabric flower. Ethan noticed such details now, cataloging them like evidence of something he couldn't quite name. Progress, maybe. Or just change. The garden was already warm despite the early hour, California sunshine burning through the marine layer that clung to the coast. Lily settled into her usual spot by the koi pond, but instead of drawing, she sat with her hands folded, watching the water. Waiting. Ava appeared at exactly 7:30, as she had for the past 3 mornings. She carried her watering can and wore the same faded work clothes. But today she also brought something else, a small cloth bag that she set on the bench beside Lily without comment. There was a bird once, Ava began, her voice soft as the morning breeze, who lived in a garden, much like this one. All the other birds sang from sunrise to sunset, filling the air with their music. But this little bird had forgotten how to sing. Lily's head turned slightly, just enough to show she was listening. The other birds tried to help. The nightingale offered to teach her complicated melodies. The blue jay demonstrated his loudest call. Even the crow, who wasn't much of a singer himself, tried to show her how to make noise. But nothing worked. Ava knelt by the flower bed, pulling weeds with practiced efficiency while she talked. The little bird felt smaller and smaller, quieter and quieter, until she wondered if she might disappear entirely. But then winter came, and all the loud birds flew south. The garden grew quiet. Ethan found himself leaning forward despite his skepticism. There was something hypnotic about Ava's storytelling voice, the way it seemed to wrap around you like warm honey. In that silence, Ava continued. The little bird heard something she'd forgotten, her own heartbeat. And she realized that before. You can sing, you have to remember you're alive. So she started there. One heartbeat, one breath, one tiny sound that was hers alone. That's a children's story. Ethan interrupted, his voice cutting through the spell. My daughter needs real help, not fairy tales. Ava looked up at him, her dark eyes steady. Sometimes the deepest truths come wrapped in simple stories, Mr. Caldwell. Children understand that better than most adults. She has the best therapists in California. Real doctors with real strategies. I'm sure she does. Ava returned to her weeding. And I'm just a maid who tells stories while she works. No harm in that, is there? But there was something in her tone that rankled him, a subtle challenge beneath the deference. Before he could respond, his phone rang. Marcus. Victor's here, his CFO said without preamble. In the hotel restaurant. He's having breakfast with Jim Steinberg. Ethan's blood chilled. Steinberg's there? Now. Apparently Victor invited him. They're discussing mutual opportunities. The implications were clear. Victor was trying to poison the merger, maybe even position himself as an alternative buyer. Ethan stood abruptly. I have to handle something, he told Lily, though he was really telling Ava. Stay here. I'll be back. He strode toward the hotel, his mind already shifting into combat mode. Behind him, Ava opened the cloth bag she'd brought, pulling out bird seed. She scattered a small handful near the bench, and, within moments, finches began to gather. Lily watched them with an intensity that would have pleased her father if he'd stayed to see it. The restaurant hummed with conversation and clinking silverware. Ethan spotted Victor immediately. He had that effect, drawing attention like a black hole drew light. He sat at a prime table overlooking the ocean, and across from him, Jim Steinberg picked at an Eggs Benedict while Victor talked, his hands moving in elaborate gestures. Caldwell. Victor's voice boomed across the space. Join us. We were just discussing the future of technology. It was a trap, obviously, but walking away would look like retreat. Ethan approached the table with measured steps. Jim, he said, nodding to Steinberg, I wasn't aware you were coming to the coast. Steinberg had the grace to look uncomfortable. Last-minute decision. Victor suggested the hotel. How thoughtful of him. Ethan remained standing, refusing Victor's gesture. Toward an empty chair. I hope you're not letting him fill your head with nonsense about our merger. Nonsense. Victor's smile was sharp. I'm simply sharing my perspective on market conditions. Jim should know all his options. His options are simple. Move forward with our agreement or explain to his board why he walked away from a 40% growth opportunity. 40% assumes perfect execution, Victor countered. But we both know Caldwell Industries has been distracted lately. Personal challenges affecting professional performance. The reference to Lily was oblique, but unmistakable. Several nearby diners were listening now, pretending not to while hanging on every word. My company's performance speaks for itself, Ethan said evenly. 4 consecutive quarters of growth, 3 successful acquisitions, and a development pipeline that's 5 years ahead of competition. Yet you can't close a simple merger, Victor said. Makes one wonder about leadership stability. Before Ethan could respond, unexpected movement caught his eye. Ava was walking past their table, carrying a tray of water glasses she was apparently delivering to another section. But as she passed Victor, she stumbled slightly. Water cascaded across Victor's expensive suit, ice cubes sliding down his silk tie. Oh, Ava gasped, looking mortified. I'm so sorry, sir. Let me, you clumsy. Victor started to rise, his face flushing red. It was my fault. Jim Steinberg interrupted, standing quickly. I moved my chair as you were passing. Please, don't. Worry about it. It was a lie, and everyone knew it. But Steinberg's intervention defused the moment, turning Victor's rage into something he had to swallow. Ava apologized again, producing towels with remarkable efficiency, and then disappeared toward the kitchen before Victor could fully recover. Perhaps we should continue this another time, Steinberg said, dabbing at water spots on his own sleeve though he'd barely been splashed. Victor, you should probably change. Victor's jaw worked like he was chewing glass, but he managed a tight smile. Of course. We'll talk later, Jim. Both of you should come to my charity event this weekend. It's for children's wellness, something I know Ethan has personal interest in. He left with as much dignity as wet clothing allowed. Steinberg watched him go, then turned to Ethan. He's toxic, Steinberg said simply. Whatever issues we have with our deal, I won't let that man anywhere near my company. Then let's solve our issues. Tonight, private dinner, just us. No lawyers, no teams. Just two CEOs finding common ground. Steinberg considered, then nodded. 8 o'clock. After he left, Ethan stood for a moment, processing what had just happened. The water incident hadn't been an accident. He was certain of that. Ava had moved with too much precision, had stumbled at exactly the right angle to maximum effect. But why would she intervene? He found her in the hallway outside the kitchen, returning the serving tray to a cart. That wasn't clumsy, he said. She looked at him with those unreadable eyes. Everyone's clumsy sometimes. You knew what you were doing. I knew I was delivering water. Sometimes things spill. She started to walk away, then paused. Your daughter's still in the garden. She's safe. The birds came today. It wasn't an answer, but somehow it was. When Ethan returned to the garden, he found Lily surrounded by finches. They hopped around her feet, pecking at seeds, completely unafraid. She sat perfectly still, as if movement might break the spell. One brave bird had actually perched on the bench beside her, its tiny black eyes studying her with curiosity. She's been like that for 20 minutes, Mr. Winters said, appearing beside Ethan with his wheelbarrow. Remarkable thing. Most children would have scared them off by now, trying to touch or grab. But she understands stillness. She doesn't have much choice, Ethan said, the words more bitter than intended. Maybe. Or maybe she's choosing to speak the language they understand. The old gardener smiled. Birds don't care much for human words anyway. They respond to patience, gentleness, presence. Your girl has all three. As if to prove his point, a cardinal landed on the bench's arm, inches from Lily's hand. She didn't reach for it, didn't even turn her head. But Ethan saw her eyes track its movement, saw the tiny smile that flickered across her face. The first he'd seen in months. His phone buzzed. Another crisis at the office, another fire to put out. But for once, Ethan let it ring through to voicemail. He sat on a nearby bench, far enough to avoid disturbing the birds, and watched his daughter be still in a way he'd never learned how. That evening, Ethan's dinner with Steinberg went better than expected. Without Victor's poisonous presence, they found the middle ground that had eluded them for weeks. The merger would proceed, with minor adjustments that satisfied both parties. It should have felt like victory, but as Ethan walked back through the hotel lobby at nearly midnight, all he could think about was the smile on Lily's face when the cardinal had sung for her. Mr. Caldwell? Ava stood near the elevator, a bucket and mop beside her. The night shift, apparently. It's late for cleaning, he observed. A guest had an accident. Red wine on white carpet. She wrung the mop with practiced efficiency. Staines said if you don't act quickly. Is that a metaphor? It's carpet care. But most practical truths work as metaphors if you think about them long enough. He should have walked on, taken the elevator to his suite. Instead, he found himself saying, "You were a teacher. Before this." Her hands stilled on the mop handle. "Who told you that?" Mr. Winters mentioned it. "Said you helped children with selective mutism." "I worked with children who had stopped speaking, yes, for various reasons. And you left teaching to become a hotel maid. Life is rarely a straight line, Mr. Caldwell." She resumed mopping, her movements steady and rhythmic. "Sometimes we end up where we're needed, not where we planned. My daughter." He stopped, unsure what he was asking. "Your daughter is processing something enormous," Ava said quietly. Her silence isn't defiance or damage. It's protection. When we experience trauma, sometimes our minds shut doors to keep us safe. The trick isn't forcing those doors open. It's making the space outside them so safe that she chooses to come out. The therapists say similar things. But it's been 2 years. And it might be 2 more. Or 2 days. Healing doesn't follow corporate timelines. The comment stung because it was accurate. Ethan had approached Lily's recovery like a business. Problem: hire the best people, implement the best strategies, measure progress in quantifiable metrics. But children weren't companies. Trauma wasn't a merger to be negotiated. "Can I ask you something?" Ava said, surprising him. "Does she ever see you just exist? Not working, not trying to fix her, not managing outcomes. Just being." Ethan opened his mouth to say yes, then closed it. When did Lily see him without a phone in his hand or a laptop open? When did they just sit together without him trying to coax words from her? "I have a company to run," he said, defensive. "And she has a childhood to live. Those two things don't have to be in opposition." Ava picked up her bucket. "Tomorrow morning, there's going to be a monarch butterfly migration through the garden. Hundreds of them, stopping to rest on their way south. Lily would love it." "How do you know about?" "I pay attention to patterns. Butterflies, children, healing. They all have patterns if you watch long enough." She moved toward the service elevator. 7:30. They never stay long. The next morning, Ethan left his phone in the suite. It took actual physical effort, like leaving a limb behind. But he walked to the garden with Lily, empty-handed except for her small hand in his. The butterflies were already arriving when they reached the garden, orange and black wings filling the air like stained glass windows come alive. They settled on every surface, flowers, benches, even the ground. The garden transformed into something from a dream. Lily stood in the middle of it all, her arms slightly outstretched, wonder written across her face. A butterfly landed on her shoulder, then another on her hand. She was absolutely still, but it was a different stillness than her usual careful quiet. This was the stillness of awe. "My God," Ethan breathed. "They come through every year," Ava said, appearing beside him with her watering can. "Same route, same timing. Genetic memory passed down through generations. They remember the way home even if they've never been there before." A butterfly landed on Ethan's sleeve. He started to brush it off, then stopped. Let it rest there, orange wings slowly opening and closing. "Daddy." The word was so quiet he almost missed it. But Lily was looking at him, her eyes bright with tears or joy or both, and she'd spoken. Just one word, barely a whisper, but it was everything. Ethan dropped to his knees, not caring about his expensive suit or the damp ground. He didn't reach for her, didn't make it bigger than it was. He just nodded, his own throat too tight for words. "I know," he managed finally. "I see them too." Lily turned back to the butterflies, but she stepped closer to him, her shoulder touching his. They stayed like that, surrounded by wings and morning light, until the butterflies began to leave as suddenly as they'd come. Later, Ava would disappear before he could thank her. Later, Victor would make another play for the merger. Later, there would be phone calls and crises and all the noise of his regular life. But for that moment, in the garden with his daughter's voice still echoing in his ears, Ethan understood. Something about stillness, about patience, about the space required for healing. That afternoon, Victor's assistant delivered an invitation to his charity event, gold embossed cardstock that felt like a summons. The theme was Voices for Tomorrow, supporting children's communication health. The irony was sharp enough to cut. "He's baiting you," Marcus said over the phone. "You don't have to go." But Ethan looked at Lily, who was carefully adding monarchs to her latest drawing, and made a decision. "We'll go," he said. "Both of us." "Ethan, my daughter spoke today, Marcus." One word, but she spoke. If Victor wants to make that into ammunition, let him try. That evening, Ethan found Ava, setting up chairs in the hotel's conference room, preparing for Victor's event. She looked up when he entered. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for this morning. For everything. I didn't do anything. The butterflies came on their own. You know that's not what I mean." She continued arranging chairs, but he caught the small smile. "Your daughter is stronger than you think. And so are you. Victor's going to try something tomorrow night. At his event. Probably. It doesn't worry you." Ava straightened, looking at him directly. "Men like Victor Hayes think volume equals power. But the smallest sounds can shatter glass if they hit the right frequency." She picked up another chair. "Your daughter said daddy today? That's a frequency that changes everything." She was right. That single word had shifted something fundamental. In Ethan's chest, loosened a knot he'd carried for 2 years. Tomorrow, Victor would do his worst. But tonight, Lily had drawn butterflies and whispered to herself while she worked, almost like she was practicing, the sound of a voice returning, tentative as butterfly wings, but just as capable of traveling impossible distances to find its way home. The garden lanterns cast pools of amber light across the paths, turning the evening into something that felt suspended between day and dream. Lily stood near the koi pond, the red origami crane clutched in her small hand, her lips moving silently, as if practicing shapes that might become sounds. Ava knelt beside her, not touching, just present. She hummed that same low melody she'd carried since the first day, the one that seemed to rise from somewhere deeper than her throat. It was a lullaby, Ethan realized, though he couldn't place its origin. Something old, something that felt like memory itself. Lily's mouth moved with the melody, shaping the wordless notes. Her free hand traced circles in the air, following the rhythm. Then, so soft it might have been the wind through the jacaranda leaves, she breathed a single word. Ava. Ethan's world stopped. His daughter's voice, unused for 2 years, 3 months, and 21 days, had found its way back to the surface. Not calling for him, not Daddy, like this morning with the butterflies, but Ava. The name hung in the air like a soap bubble, fragile and perfect. His instinct was immediate and corporate. Document this. His hand went to his phone, muscle memory of a man who recorded everything, who believed in evidence and metrics and measurable progress. We should record this for Dr. Harrison, he whispered, already opening the camera app. She needs to see. Ava's hand covered his screen, not forcefully, just a gentle pressure that somehow carried more weight than force ever could. Let's make this moment hers, she said quietly. Not a file, not a case study, just hers. Ethan froze, phone halfway raised. He saw himself suddenly as Lily must see him, always documenting, always managing, turning even her breakthrough into data points for analysis. His hand dropped. The phone disappeared into his pocket. You're right, he said, the word strange. In his mouth. When was the last time he'd said that to anyone? Ava turned back to Lily, who was watching them with those careful eyes that saw everything. That was beautiful, Ava told her, speaking directly to the child, not about her. Your voice sounds exactly like I imagined it would. Like wind chimes. Lily's hand tightened on the origami crane, but her shoulders relaxed a fraction. She'd been heard. Not recorded, not analyzed, just heard. The selective mutism, Ethan said quietly, needing to understand. It's trauma-based, not defiance. The doctor said that, but I didn't really. When something terrible happens, Ava explained, her voice clinical but warm. Sometimes our minds protect us by closing doors. Your daughter's voice got locked behind one of those doors. Not because she's broken, but because her mind was keeping her safe the only way it knew how. And the bird story? The humming. Metaphors give us safe ways to approach unsafe things. The humming engages a different part of the nervous system than speech. It's like finding a side door when the main entrance is barricaded. She was still kneeling by Lily, but her words were for Ethan. Teaching him, he realized, the way she must have taught dozens of parents before, when she was whoever she'd been before she was a hotel maid. What do we do now? He asked, surprised. By his own use of we. Less, Ava said simply. We do less. No pushing, no recording, no making it bigger than it is. She said my name. Tomorrow she might say nothing. Next week she might say everything or nothing or something in between. We just make space for whatever comes. I'm not good at doing less. I noticed. There was humor in her voice, gentle but present. Maybe start small. Morning garden time. No phone. No meetings cutting in. No questions that demand answers. Can you give her that? Ethan looked at his daughter, who had gone back to watching the koi, the moment of speech already folded back into silence. But it was a different silence now. Fuller, somehow. Pregnant with possibility. Yes, he said that he pulled out his phone, not to record but to text his assistant. Hold all morning meetings for the next week. No exceptions. Maya's response was immediate. Is everything okay? It's becoming okay, he typed back, then turned the phone to silent. Across the hotel, in the executive lounge, Victor Hayes sat. With a young man in a server's uniform, sliding cash across the table. "The maid," Victor said, showing a photo on his phone. "Ava Thompson. Find out everything about her. Where she worked before, where she lives, who she really is." "That's not really my job. It is now." Victor added another 100 to the stack. "And keep an eye on the CEO's kid. Any changes, anything unusual, I want to know." The server, Bradley, his name tag read, pocketed the money with nervous fingers. "What are you looking for exactly?" "Leverage," Victor said simply. "Everyone has secrets. Find me hers." After Bradley left, Victor pulled up an old photo on his tablet. A courthouse steps, 5 years ago. A younger Ava in the background, a blanket around her shoulders, ash in her hair. Behind her, the burned skeleton of Hayes Tower, one of his properties. 43 units destroyed. 2 deaths. And one woman who'd refused to sign an NDA, who'd testified about faulty fire alarms and ignored safety complaints. He'd never connected that woman to this hotel maid. Not until he'd really looked at her this morning, seen something familiar in the way she moved, the way she deliberately spilled that water. Deliberate. Everything she did was deliberate. "Found you," he murmured, already composing tomorrow night's presentation for his charity event. Back in the garden, Lily had moved to the carved bench, tracing the worn circles in the stone with one finger. Ethan sat beside her, not too close, just sharing the space. Ava watered the night-blooming jasmine, its perfume thick in the warm air. "The red scarf," Ava said quietly, looking at Lily's latest drawing. "She draws it in everything." Ethan's throat tightened. Her mother wore one. The morning of the accident. Sarah always wore bright colors, said it made the world happier. The scarf got caught in the wreckage. They had to cut it to get Lily out. He'd never said those words aloud, not even to the therapists. But here, in the garden's soft darkness, with his daughter's voice still echoing in memory, the truth felt possible. "She blames herself," Ava said. It wasn't a question. The other driver ran a red light. There was nothing anyone could have done. But Lily had been asking Sarah to look at something, a bird outside the window. She thinks if she hadn't distracted her, children always blame themselves. It's how they make sense of senseless things. Ava set down her watering can, moved closer to the bench. Has anyone told her, really told her, that it wasn't her fault? Of course. The therapists, me, everyone. But has anyone shown her? Before Ethan could ask what that meant, Lily made a small sound. Not a word, just a soft vocalization, like she was testing her voice. She touched the red crane, then looked at Ava. "Bird," she whispered. "2 words now. 2 words in one evening." After 2 years of silence, Ethan bit his lip hard enough to hurt, holding back the sob that wanted to escape. He felt Ava's hand on his shoulder, brief but grounding. "Bird," Ava agreed simply. "A red bird that remembered how to fly." That night, after Lily was asleep, Ethan stood on the suite's balcony, looking down at the garden. The lanterns were off now, the paths mysterious in moonlight. Somewhere down there, Ava was probably still working, preparing for tomorrow's event, arranging chairs and tables for Victor's performative charity. His phone rang. "Marcus, how's everything?" Lily spoke tonight. 2 words. Silence on the other. And then, "Ethan, that's incredible." "It is." He watched clouds drift across the moon. "Marcus, I need you to handle the Chicago meeting next week. In person. You're extending your stay? Indefinitely. The board won't like that. The board can adjust. I've been running at 100 miles an hour for years. Maybe it's time to try a different speed." After ending the call, Ethan walked to Lily's room. She slept curled on her side, the red crane on her nightstand, her sketchbook open to a new drawing. This one showed the garden at night, with 3 figures sitting on a bench. The proportions were off, the perspective skewed, but it was clearly meant to be the 3 of them: Ethan, Lily, and Ava. Above them, she'd drawn stars that looked like butterflies, or butterflies that looked like stars. The bottom of the page, in shaky but determined letters, she'd written, "AVA." Her first written word in 2 years. The ballroom gleamed with the kind of aggressive elegance that money could buy, but taste couldn't guarantee. Victor had transformed the space into his vision of charity. Crystal chandeliers dimmed just enough to flatter wealthy faces, auction items displayed like museum pieces, and a stage backed by screens showing smiling children who'd never actually been helped by Victor's foundation. "Voices for Tomorrow," Supporting Children's Communication Health, read the banner stretched across the stage. The irony wasn't lost on Ethan as he adjusted Lily's small cardigan, making sure she was comfortable. She'd wanted to come, had actually nodded when he'd asked, though he suspected it was more about staying close to him than any interest in the event. "We don't have to stay long," he promised her. She held his hand tighter, her other arm clutching the red crane that had become her constant companion. She'd dressed herself in her favorite dress, soft lavender with tiny birds embroidered on the collar. Sarah would have loved it. The room was already filling with investors, local business leaders, and hotel guests drawn by the promise of an open bar and the spectacle of wealth performing compassion. Ethan recognized most faces, people he'd shared conference rooms with, competed against, occasionally respected. They looked at him differently now, their eyes sliding to Lily with curiosity, poorly disguised as sympathy. "Caldwell." Victor's voice boomed across the room. He stood near the stage, resplendent in a tuxedo that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "So glad you could make it. And you brought your daughter. How brave." The word brave hit like a slap, making Lily's presence sound like a circus act. "We're happy to support children's wellness," Ethan replied evenly. Of course. We all have our investments in the cause." Victor's smile was all teeth. "I have a special presentation tonight about the importance of knowing who's really helping our children." Before Ethan could respond, the lights dimmed slightly, and Victor took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight in support of Children's Communication Health. As someone who's built his career on clear communication and transparency, this cause is close to my heart." Polite applause rippled through the room. Ethan found them seats near the side, close enough to an exit if Lily needed to leave. She sat pressed against his side, watching everything with those careful eyes. "Tonight, I want to talk about trust," Victor continued. "When our children struggle, we trust professionals to help them. We trust that the people around them have their best interests at heart. But what happens when that trust is misplaced?" The screens behind him changed, showing a photo that made Ethan's blood run cold. It was Ava, but from years ago, standing outside a courthouse. Her clothes were singed, ash in her hair, a blanket around her shoulders. Behind her, the skeletal remains of a burned building. Gasps echoed through the room. Murmurs rose like disturbed birds. "Some of you may remember the Hayes Tower fire 5 years ago," Victor said, his voice heavy with false concern. 43 units destroyed. 2 deaths. And questions about a woman who claimed to be a hero but refused to cooperate with authorities. That was a lie. Ethan knew it instantly, could see it in the way Victor's eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction. From the side of the room, a calm voice cut through the murmurs. "May I?" Ava stood near the staff entrance, still in her hotel uniform. She shouldn't have been there. Staff didn't attend guest events unless they were serving. But she walked forward with the same measured pace she used in the garden, and something about her presence made people step aside. The general manager moved to intercept her, but stopped when she raised her hand slightly. "I'd like to address Mr. Hayes's implications. With your permission." The manager looked between her and Victor, clearly calculating the hotel's liability either way. Then he handed her his wireless microphone. "Since Mr. Hayes has chosen to share part of my story," Ava said, her voice carrying despite its softness, "let me share the rest." She turned to face the audience, and Ethan saw several people lean forward, captured by something in her bearing. 5 years ago, I was a teacher's aide at the elementary school near Hayes Tower. That building, Mr. Hayes's property, had been cited for 17 safety violations in the previous 2 years. Broken fire alarms, blocked exits, faulty sprinkler systems. All documented. All ignored. Victor's face darkened. "You have no proof. I have the court records," Ava continued calmly. "Would you like me to quote them?" October 15th, Judge Marina Kellerman presiding. "The negligence displayed by Hayes Properties in maintaining basic safety standards directly contributed to preventable deaths." The room was dead silent now. "When the fire started," Ava said, "I was walking home from school. I heard screaming from a third-floor window. A child, trapped because the fire escape door had been painted shut, another violation. I went in." She paused, not for drama, but as if gathering herself. "I got her out. 7-year-old Keisha Williams. She didn't speak for 6 months afterward. Trauma does that sometimes. Takes our voices when the world becomes too terrible for words. I stayed with her. Visited every day. Hummed to her, told her stories, waited. Because healing isn't about being a hero. It's about showing up consistently, quietly, until someone feels safe enough to exist again. This is ancient history, Victor sputtered. You're right, Ava agreed. Keisha's 13 now. She volunteers at this hotel on weekends. She's planning to become a teacher. She looked directly at Victor. The building you let burn? She lived there with her grandmother, who didn't make it out. So yes, Mr. Hayes, I refuse to sign your NDA. I refuse to take your money to stay quiet. And I testified about every violation I knew of. If that makes me untrustworthy, I can live with that judgment. From the back of the room, a teenage girl stood up. Ethan recognized her. She'd been helping at breakfast service all week. That's me, the girl said, her voice shaking but determined. Keisha Williams. Ms. Ava saved my life. And then she saved it again by staying when everyone else left. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, from beside Ethan, a small, clear voice said, "Stop." Every head turned. Lily stood on her chair, the red crane clutched in her hand, looking directly at Victor. Her face was pale but determined. "Stop," she said again, louder this time. "Being mean. Stop." The word rang out like a bell, like a bullet, like a broken spell. Lily, who hadn't spoken in public for 2 years, had found her voice to defend someone else. Victor's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Someone in the audience started clapping, slow, deliberate applause that spread through the room like fire through dry grass. Not for Victor's presentation, but for a 6-year-old girl who'd remembered how to speak truth. "I think," the general manager said, stepping forward, "we need to review tonight's event structure." He gestured to security, who moved toward Victor. With professional discretion. Behind them, Maya, Ethan's assistant who'd apparently arrived at some point, held up her tablet. "I have security footage," she announced, "of Mr. Hayes bribing hotel staff for private information about guests. Bradley Summers has already provided a statement. That's a violation of hotel policy and privacy laws." Victor's face went from red to white. "This is ridiculous. I'm trying to run a charity event. Your charity's registration was revoked 2 years ago for misuse of funds," someone called from the audience. Ethan recognized Jennifer Walsh, a federal prosecutor who happened to vacation here regularly. "I checked after your announcement. You've been collecting donations for a non-existent organization." The room erupted. Investors pulled out phones. Voices rose in anger and disbelief. Victor tried to speak, to salvage something, but his words were drowned in the chaos he'd created. Through it all, Lily stood on her chair, still holding the crane, looking like a small warrior who'd won her first battle. Ethan lifted her down, pulled her close. "That was brave," he whispered. "Really brave." "Ava needed help," Lily whispered back, like the bird in her story. Across the room, Ava stood with Keisha, their hands clasped. The teenager was crying, but smiling too. Years of silence and survival validated in front of people who'd never had to fight for either. "Mr. Caldwell." Jim Steinberg appeared at Ethan's elbow, his expression thoughtful. "That's your daughter?" "Yes. She's remarkable. Like someone else." "I see." He glanced at Ava. "When we finalize our merger, I want ethics clauses. Real ones, with teeth. And I want that woman consulting on our community engagement programs, if she's willing." "She's a hotel maid," Ethan said, testing. "She's a teacher who saved a child from a burning building and stood up to a billionaire in front of his own event. I don't care if she cleans toilets for a living. Integrity like that is rare." Victor was being escorted out now, his protests fading as security guided him through the service exit. The party was dissolving, people leaving in clusters, gossip already spreading like wildfire through their social networks. But in their small corner, something else was happening. Lily had walked over to Ava and Keisha, still clutching her crane. She held it out to the teenager. "For you," she said, her voice small but steady. "Red birds remember how to fly." Keisha knelt down, accepting the gift with the gravity it deserved. "Thank you. You know what? I have something for you too." She pulled out her phone, opened a voice memo app, and played a recording. It was her own voice from years ago, the first words she'd spoken after the fire. Just one word, repeated, "Ava, Ava." Ava. She was my first word too, Keisha told Lily. The person who makes us feel safe enough to speak. That's special. Lily nodded solemnly, then did something that stopped Ethan's heart. She hugged Keisha, then Ava, then ran back to him and pressed her face against his jacket. Can we go to the garden? She whispered. I want to tell the birds what happened. Yes, Ethan said, his voice thick. We can do that. As they left, he heard someone saying Victor was being investigated for fraud, that his company's board was calling an emergency meeting, that the scandal would be everywhere by morning. But none of that mattered as much as his daughter's hand in his, warm and trusting, and her voice humming, actually humming, Ava's lullaby as they walked toward the garden where birds waited to hear stories of girls who remembered how to speak. Behind them, Ava stood with Keisha, watching them go. Tomorrow there would be decisions to make, conversations to have, futures to navigate. But tonight, in a ballroom where truth had shattered performance, 3 voices that had been lost were finally, fully found. The morning after Victor's spectacular implosion dawned crisp and clear, as if the weather itself had decided on a fresh start. The hotel buzzed with the particular energy that follows scandal, staff moving with purpose, guests lingering over breakfast to dissect the previous night's drama, and management holding hushed meetings behind closed doors that in the general manager's office. Patricia Hartwell sat across from her senior staff, hands folded on the mahogany desk. Victor Hayes is permanently banned from all properties in our chain. The server who accepted his bribes has been terminated, and we need to discuss Ms. Thompson. She wasn't authorized to attend the event's coordinator pointed out. She also prevented what could have been a public relations nightmare. Patricia countered. If Hayes had continued his presentation unchallenged, if that little girl hadn't spoken up, we'd be dealing with lawsuits from every direction. The guests are calling her a hero, the concierge added. 3 separate parties have asked if she offers private tutoring for children with speech difficulties. Patricia looked out the window at the garden where Ava was already working, back in her uniform as if last night had been a dream. Set up a meeting. This afternoon. In a quieter corner of the hotel, Ethan sat in the business center, his laptop open to 17 urgent emails he wasn't reading. Through the window, he watched Lily and Ava in the garden. His daughter was talking, actually talking, in short sentences punctuated by long pauses, but talking nonetheless. She fed the fish, Lily said, pointing at the pond. 3 times. They remember. Fish have better memories than people think, Ava agreed, scattering food across the water. They recognize faces, remember routines. Like you. I remembered your song. You did. Even when the words were hiding, you remembered the melody. Ethan's phone rang. Marcus, you need to see the news, his CFO said without preamble. If it's about Victor, it's worse than you think. Federal investigation for fraud, embezzlement, charity scams going back a decade. His board called an emergency meeting at 5 a.m. He's out. Complete liquidation of his position by noon. That was fast. Turns out Jennifer Walsh had been building a case for 2 years. Last night gave her the final evidence she needed. Ethan, this is going to ripple through the entire industry. Anyone who dealt with him is under scrutiny. We're clean. Completely. Actually, the fact that you refused his offers repeatedly is being seen as prescient. Stocks up 3% in pre-market trading. Ethan closed his laptop. Marcus, I need you to handle something for me. Set up a foundation. Real one, not like Victor's shell game. Focus on trauma-informed education for children with communication disorders. Budget. Start with $5 million. Personal funds, not company money. That's generous. It's necessary. He watched Lily hand Ava a drawing, something with yellow wings. And Marcus? See if Ava Thompson would be willing to consult on it. Whatever. Her hotel salary is triple it. After ending the call, Ethan walked to the garden. The morning sun had burned off the coastal fog, leaving everything sharp-edged and clear. Lily looked up as he approached, and for the first time in 2 years, she smiled at his arrival instead of just acknowledging it. Daddy, look. She held up her newest drawing. Butterfly bird. It was fantastical, impossible, a creature with butterfly wings and a bird's body. But it was also joyful in a way her drawings hadn't been since before the accident. The red scarf was still there, but now it was incorporated into the wings, part of the transformation rather than a symbol of loss. It's beautiful, he said, meaning it. Ms. Ava says impossible things are just possible things we haven't seen yet. She's probably right. Ava stood, brushing soil from her knees. I should get back to work. The roses need deadheading. Wait. Ethan pulled out his phone, showed her an email from Steinberg. He's serious about the consulting position. The merger includes a community engagement component, and he wants you leading it. I'm a hotel maid. You're a teacher who became a hotel maid because Victor Hayes destroyed your career for telling the truth. That ends now. She looked at him steadily. I like my work here. It's honest. Simple. No one gets hurt if I miss a spot vacuuming. But you could help more children. Like you helped Keisha. Like you're helping Lily. Before she could respond, Patricia Hartwell appeared on the garden path, her expression carefully professional. Miss Thompson, could we speak privately? Ava nodded, set down her tools. As she walked away, Lily tugged on Ethan's sleeve. Is Ava in trouble? No, sweetheart. I think she's about to get options. What are options? Choices about what comes next. Lily considered this. I want her to stay. I know. Will you tell her? I think. Ethan said carefully, she already knows. In Patricia's office, Ava sat with the same straight-backed poise she brought to everything. Patricia studied her across the desk, seeing her properly for perhaps the first time. 5 years of perfect attendance, Patricia read from a file. No complaints. Guest compliment cards specifically mentioning you. Yet you never applied for advancement. I wasn't looking to advance. What were you looking for? Quiet. Time to think. Space to figure out who I was after everything burned down, literally and figuratively. Patricia set aside the file. The hotel has received 3 inquiries this morning about developing a children's program. Specifically, a program for guests with children who have special needs, including communication disorders. The board is interested. That's wonderful. I want you to run it. Ava's hands stilled in her lap. I'm not qualified. You were a teacher. You have experience with selective mutism and trauma response. You saved a child from a burning building and then helped her find her voice again. Last night, you stood up to a billionaire and told the truth when lying would have been easier. I'd say you're overqualified. My teaching certification lapsed. We'll pay for renewal and continuing education and anything else you need. Patricia leaned forward. Ava, what you've done for the Caldwell child in less than a week, that's a gift. We want to make it available to other families. It's not just me. It's the garden, the environment, the time and space to then design the program around that. Use the garden. Create the environment. We have the resources. You have the knowledge. A knock interrupted them. Patricia's assistant entered, looking flustered. There's a teenager here, Keisha Williams. She says she needs to speak with Miss Thompson. Urgently. Ava stood immediately. In the lobby, she found Keisha holding a tablet, tears streaming down her face. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, Keisha managed. Look. She turned the tablet around. It was a news article with the headline, Hotel Maid Who Saved Child from Hayes Tower Fire Honored by Survivors Foundation. Below was a photo from last night. Ava standing in the ballroom, speaking truth to power. They want to give you an award, Keisha said. The Survivors Group. For refusing to be silenced. For keeping Victor from hurting more people. Ms. Ava, you're trending on social media. Everyone's calling you the woman who speaks for children. Who can't speak. Ava sat down hard on a lobby chair. I just told the truth. Yeah, Keisha said, sitting beside her. That's the point. By afternoon, Ethan found himself in an unexpected meeting. Patricia Hartwell had called him to her office, where Ava was already seated, looking overwhelmed. Mr. Caldwell, I've offered Ms. Thompson the position of director of our new Children's Wellness Initiative. She's hesitating. I don't want to abandon my regular work, Ava explained. The cleaning staff, they're my friends. My team. Then don't abandon them, Ethan said. Split your time. Morning gardens with the children's program, afternoons with your regular duties if you want. Write your own job description. That's irregular. Patricia noted. So is she. Ethan turned to Ava. My daughter spoke your name before mine. That should upset me, but it doesn't. You know why? Because you saw her when I was only seeing her silence. You heard her when I was only hearing what was missing. You're her father. That's different. You're right. It is different. I was so focused on fixing her that I forgot to just be with her. You taught us both something about stillness. About patience. About creating space for healing instead of forcing it. Patricia cleared her throat. There's one more thing. The teenager, Keisha, has asked to be your assistant in the program. She's volunteering to work with families on weekends, sharing her story. She's 13, Ava protested. She's 13 with lived experience that could help other children, Patricia countered. With proper supervision and boundaries, it could be powerful. Ava looked between them, then out the window at the garden where Lily sat drawing, her lips moving in what might have been song or speech or something in between. Can I have a day to think? Of course, Patricia said. But Ava? Sometimes the best decisions are the ones that scare us. They mean we're about to grow. 8 weeks later, the hotel garden hosted its first official quiet hour, a Saturday morning program where families with children facing communication challenges could exist without pressure or judgment. The paths that had once carried only tourists now held a different kind of visitor. Parents who looked exhausted but hopeful. Children who moved through the world carefully, quietly, differently. Lily stood by the koi pond, no longer alone but not quite social either. She spoke now in sentences that grew longer each day, though she still chose silence around strangers. Progress wasn't linear. Dr. Harrison had been right about that. Some days were voiceful, others weren't. But the fear was gone, replaced by choice. The fish are getting fat, she told her father, who sat on the bench reading actual paper newspapers instead of his phone. Probably because you keep feeding them. Ava says happy fish are fat fish. Ava says a lot of things. You listen now. It was true. Ethan had become someone who listened. Not just to words but to the spaces between them, the meanings that lived. In gesture and glance and breath. His company hadn't collapsed without his constant presence. If anything, it had thrived under Maya's expanded responsibilities and the new leadership team he'd finally trusted to lead. Mr. Caldwell? He looked up to find a woman with a young boy, maybe 4, who pressed against her leg like he was trying to disappear. I'm Rebecca Turner. This is James. He hasn't spoken since his father died. Our therapist recommended your program. Before Ethan could explain he wasn't running anything, Lily stepped forward. Not too close, respecting the boy's space, but present. I didn't talk either, she said simply. For a long time. But the garden helps. Want to see the fish? The boy peered at her from behind his mother's leg, considering. Then, in the smallest movement, he nodded. Lily led them to the pond, talking in her careful way about the koi, their colors, their names she'd given them. The boy didn't speak, but he watched, and when Lily offered him fish food, he took it. Your daughter's remarkable, Rebecca said to Ethan. She's learning that helping others helps herself, he replied, watching Lily demonstrate how to scatter the food so all the fish got some. We both are. Across the garden, Ava led a different group. 3 families with children at various stages of selective mutism. She didn't lecture or push. Instead, she created activities that invited but didn't demand participation. Humming circles where voices could join or just listen. Art stations where feelings could be drawn instead of spoken. Story corners where metaphors made hard things softer. Keisha worked beside her, her teenage energy balanced with hard-earned wisdom. She knew when to share her own story and when to just be present, a living example that voices could return, that fire didn't have to be the end of everything. Ms. Ava, one parent said, how long until my son speaks again? I don't know, Ava replied honestly. But I know he will, in his own way, in his own time. Our job is to make sure he knows we're here when he's ready. The program had structure now. Official funding from Ethan's foundation, partnership with local hospitals, a waiting list that grew daily. But it maintained the organic quality that had healed Lily, that sense of garden time where growth happened at its own pace. Patricia Hartwell watched from her office window, seeing what the metrics couldn't fully capture. The hotel's reputation had transformed. They were no longer just a luxury destination, but a place where healing happened. Bookings were up 40%, with families specifically requesting rooms during quiet hour weekends. A knock at her door interrupted her observation. Her assistant entered with an envelope. This just arrived by courier. Marked urgent. Patricia opened it, read quickly, then smiled. It seems Mr. Hayes's Victims Fund has made a substantial donation to our children's program. 7 figures. That's wonderful. The irony is delicious. Victor's assets, seized in the investigation, now funding everything he tried to destroy. In the garden, The morning session was winding down. Parents exchanged contact information. Children who'd been silent waved goodbye, and slowly the space returned to its tourist-ready tranquility. But Lily lingered, as she always did, sitting on the carved bench that had become her thinking spot. Ethan joined her, their Saturday ritual. "Daddy," she said, tracing the worn circles in the stone. "Do you think Mommy would be proud?" The question landed like a physical blow, but Ethan had learned not to flinch from the hard moments. "I think," he said carefully, "she would be amazed at how brave you've become, how you use your voice to help others find theirs. I still miss her." "Me too. Every day. But it doesn't hurt the same way." "No," Ethan agreed. "It doesn't." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the garden move through its rhythms. Ava appeared on the path, having changed from her program clothes back to her maintenance uniform. She still split her time, refusing to fully abandon the work that had given her refuge when she'd needed it. "Successful morning?" Ethan asked. 3 new words from the Hendricks boy, a full sentence from Emma Chun, and James, the one who just lost his father. He hummed along to the goodbye song. "That's wonderful. It's a start." She pulled out pruning shears, moved toward the roses. "Beginnings are delicate things. They need the right conditions." "Ava," Lily called, "will you tell the bird story at closing circle next week? If you help me, I can do the bird voices now." It was true. Lily had become part of the program, a peer mentor despite her young age. Children responded to her differently than to adults, trusted her silence as much as her words. "Then we'll tell it together." Ava agreed. As she worked, humming that same melody that had called Lily's voice back from wherever it had been hiding. Ethan felt the strange completeness of the moment. Not an ending. Trauma didn't really end, it just became part of the story. But a place of rest, maybe. A garden bench where broken things could sit until they remembered they were also whole. His phone buzzed. Maya, with updates about the Singapore expansion. He glanced at it, then powered it off completely. "Ice cream?" he asked Lily. "Before lunch." "Why not?" Sometimes the best things come in the wrong order. They walked toward the hotel, Lily's hand in his, her voice humming Ava's melody with her own variations. Behind them, the garden held its secrets and stories. Carved benches worn smooth by countless hands, koi that remembered faces, paths that led not to destinations but to discoveries. The bird had remembered how to sing. Not the same song as before, but a new one, born from silence and struggle and the strange grace that comes from breaking and being rebuilt. In the garden where metaphors became real and real things became metaphorical, 3 people had found each other in the searching, had created family from fragments, had spoken truth into silence until silence itself became a kind of speech. The red scarf still appeared in Lily's drawings, but now it was integrated into wings, into sunrise colors, into the bright threads that connected her figures on the page. Not forgotten, never forgotten, but transformed into something that could carry her forward instead of holding her back. "Daddy," she said as they entered the hotel, "I want to be a teacher like Ava when I grow up, but also maybe an artist. Or someone who talks to fish." "You can be all of those things." "Really? Really? The world needs people who understand different languages, words, pictures, silence, fish bubbles. You speak all of them." She smiled, the expression still rare enough to be remarkable. "Ava says I'm multilingual." "Ava's usually right. You didn't used to think that." "I didn't used to think a lot of things." They ordered ice cream in the hotel restaurant, strawberry for her, chocolate for him, and ate it while watching the ocean through the windows. Somewhere, Victor Hayes was facing federal charges. Somewhere, Steinberg was implementing the ethics protocols their merger had pioneered. Somewhere, other children sat in silence, waiting for their own gardens, their own Avas, their own moments of breaking through. But here, now, a father and daughter shared ice cream on a Saturday morning, talking and not talking in equal measure. Both languages finally making sense. The bird had found its voice. The garden kept growing. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between words, you could hear something that sounded like healing, tentative and fragile as butterfly wings, but strong enough to carry the weight of hope in the distance. Ava's humming drifted through the air, that ancient lullaby that had called voices back from the darkness. Lily hummed along, harmonizing in her own way, adding her voice to the song that never really ended, just pause sometimes, waiting for the next singer to remember the words. What would you sacrifice to help someone find their voice again? Your pride, your control, or just your assumptions about who's worthy of teaching you life's most important lessons? If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us that healing often comes from the most unexpected places.